It all started as a brilliant idea, camping at Cedar Ridge State Park to celebrate our graduation. There were 6 of us, crammed into 2 tents, with an absurd amount of beer and marshmallows. The vibe was that classic end-of-an-era feeling, loud laughter, inside jokes, and the sense that the world was finally ours. But around 4 p.m., as we were setting up the tents, the first sign that something was wrong appeared. A park ranger emerged out of nowhere, his spotless uniform contrasting with the dry brush around him. He introduced himself as Ranger Mike and asked to see our camping permits. Normal enough, right? Wrong. He checked the documents 3 times, flipping each page like he was searching for an invisible error, while asking odd questions. You kids came alone? No one else knows you're here. I thought it was just my paranoia, but the guy wouldn't leave us alone. After half an hour, he finally left, but the air felt heavy with silence. That's when I noticed, the way he looked at us wasn't normal. It wasn't just curiosity, it was like he was calculating. Later, as we roasted marshmallows, he came back. This time, no mention of permits. He stood at the edge of our campsite, scribbling in a black notebook, and asked if we had plans for the night. When Lucas said we were just drinking and telling stories, he let out a dry, humorless laugh and said, "You'd better not. This area's unpredictable." The way he said unpredictable sent a chill down my spine. No one else seemed to notice, but I couldn't shake the emptiness in his stare. Night fell fast, bringing a thick darkness that swallowed even the sound of crickets. We were mid-game of truth or dare when we heard a noise coming from the supply backpack. It sounded like something dragging across the ground, but when we checked, everything was still. I assumed it was an animal, but what we found was worse. Our food box had been ransacked, chip bags torn open, water bottles spilled, all arranged in a perfect circle around the pack. No one had seen or heard a thing, but in the middle of the mess lay a crumpled note with letters cut from a newspaper, "Leave before he comes back." The paper was damp, like someone had pressed a sweaty palm to it. We bolted for the ranger's cabin, half a mile away, but the path felt endless. When we arrived, Ranger Mike was on the porch, polishing a flashlight with a cloth. We showed him the note, and he shook his head, feigning surprise. "Wasn't me. Must have been vandals," he said, but his voice was strained, like he was lying, or scared. That's when I noticed, the flashlight he was cleaning had a deep scratch on the metal, identical to the ones on our food box. We went back to camp, trying to convince ourselves it was just a stupid prank, but the mood had shifted. Even the air felt heavier. We turned in early, but no one could relax. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of snapping branches near the tent. Through the zipper, I saw a tall figure standing by the trees, holding something that glinted in his hand, Ranger Mike's flashlight. He stood motionless for 5 minutes before vanishing into the dark. When I woke the others, they brushed it off. "You're seeing things, man," said Peter, but I knew what I'd seen. The next morning, we packed up to leave. Chaos, half the food was gone, and the car wouldn't start. As Lucas fiddled with the engine, we heard footsteps circling the camp, not normal footsteps. Slow, dragging, like something was closing in. Suddenly, a rock flew at the windshield, cracking the glass. We shouted for Ranger Mike, who appeared seconds later, pretending surprise. "Car trouble?" he asked, smiling without showing teeth. When the car finally started, we sped off, but something was wrong. The steering wheel shook violently, the engine roaring unnaturally. In the rear view, Ranger Mike stood on the road, still smiling, flashlight aimed at us, but instead of light, it cast a beam of darkness, as if projecting an absence of light. I blinked, and he was gone. 10 minutes later, a "road closed" sign blocked the park's only exit. We stopped, realizing all 4 tires were flat, at the same time. Rusty nails littered the ground, and among them lay another note, this one handwritten, "You shouldn't be here." As we argued about what to do, the car radio crackled to life, without being turned on. A distorted voice repeated, "Leave, leave," dissolving into a guttural laugh. We bolted into the woods, directionless, until a branch whipped my face, knocking me down. When I stood, I froze. Massive, claw-like footprints led toward us, deep in the mud. In the center lay the ranger's flashlight, split in half, the same scratch matching the food box. Panic set in. We ran back to the car, but the sound of something approaching grew deafening, not footsteps, but like boulders being dragged over stone. Reaching the road, we found Ranger Mike again, standing in the middle of the path, holding a walkie-talkie blaring the same distorted laugh. He didn't flinch as we sped past, but Becky screamed when his reflection flashed in the car window, no face under the hat, just a dark void where eyes and mouth should have been. We collapsed at the park entrance, trembling, and called emergency services. The operator said no Ranger Mike worked there. As she spoke, I glanced back. The ranger watched from a distance, now out of uniform, a lanky silhouette with arms too long. He raised a hand in farewell, and instantly, all our phones buzzed, a group message from an unknown number, with a photo of us camping. We were smiling, but behind the trees, a dark figure watched. The caption read, "You never really leave." Months later, I'm still trying to make sense of it. We thought going home was the end, but things got worse. A week later, I got a blocked call. The distorted voice hissed, "He's still with you." I hung up, but the next day, my roommate found one of my camping shoes soaked in fresh mud, despite not being worn since. When I threw it out, I found a note in the sole, same cut-out letters, "Running won't help." No one talks about that night. We try to move on, but sometimes, alone in my room, I hear a flashlight click on outside my window. When I check, there's nothing, just a fresh scratch on the wall, matching the food box and broken flashlight. And the dreams, always the same, me running through the woods, something chasing me. When I turn, Ranger Mike smiles, but where his face should be is a dark void, whispering, "You'll never leave here." I wake drenched in sweat, feeling watched. Worst of all, I'm not alone. Yesterday, I saw Lucas at the grocery store. Pale, clutching a bag of marshmallows, he whispered, "He's back. It's not safe." Before I could ask more, he fled, dropping the bag. Inside, someone had pasted a note, "You never learn." Traveling with 2 young kids is already a challenge, but we decided to risk a camping trip to Green Lake to save money. We paid half the nightly rate because the campground was packed, families crammed into tents side by side, kids running around with flashlights at night, that controlled chaos of vacation. The first day seemed normal, marshmallows, bad jokes, even the 3-year-old from the neighboring tent laughing herself to sleep. But around midnight, we heard heavy footsteps near our tent. "Just the drunk teens from the lake," my husband muttered, rolling over. I wasn't so sure. The steps paused right by our tent zipper, like someone was waiting. The next morning, our youngest, 5-year-old Lucas, whined that his stuffed bear had vanished. We searched everywhere, asked neighbors, nothing. Then, in the afternoon, we found the toy tossed near the communal bathroom, caked in dirt. Lucas lunged to hug it, but something made me check the bear first. When I squeezed its body, I felt a hard edge. I ripped the fabric, and a rusty-bladed camping knife fell out, black handle, red marker scrawled on the blade, "You shouldn't stay here." The shaky handwriting and alcohol stench on the paper made me gag. My husband brushed it off. Some jerk found the toy, saw the note, and tried to scare us. "We'll leave tomorrow, okay?" But I knew better. That night, as the kids slept, I heard whispers outside the tent. Not teen voices, low, slurred, like someone repeating the same words endlessly. When I unzipped the tent, I saw shadows darting between trees, but the campground was silent, as if all the other campers had vanished. I crawled back in, clutching the knife, wondering who'd gotten close enough to touch our son. In the morning, we went to the campground office. The security guard, a slovenly man in a coffee-stained shirt, barely glanced at the note. "This place is full of drunks and stoners. You should have paid for tent insurance," he grumbled, chomping gum. I left shaking with anger. On the way back, I noticed something odd. All the other families seemed too normal. Kids playing in eerie silence, adults smiling for no reason, like actors. Even the neighbor's baby, who'd laughed so loudly before, now stared blankly at the lake. That night, we slept with the car parked next to the tent, doors unlocked for emergencies. Around 2 a.m., a metallic clank woke me. Someone was tampering with the car door. I flashed my phone's light and screamed, but only caught a tall, lanky figure sprinting toward the lake. On the ground near the tire was a stone arrangement, a circle with an X, like a target. My husband wanted to call the police, but our phones had no signal. When we tried to start the car to leave, the battery was dead, impossible, since we'd used the GPS earlier. At breakfast, Lucas refused to eat. He stared at the bear, now clumsily repaired with duct tape, and muttered it smelled like dirty water. As I made oatmeal, I noticed the pot lid was muddy, though I'd washed it the night before. Worse, inside the pot was one of the stones from the parking lot target, a new note wrapped around it, "You're not welcome here." The handwriting matched the knife, but the paper was damp, like it had been left lakeside. And beside the stove were small, barefoot child's footprints leading to our tent, though Lucas hadn't left my side. We packed up to hike to the main parking lot, but the trail was dark and winding. As we walked, Lucas gripped my hand and whispered, "The lake man's following us." I glanced back, only swaying trees. But something in the water caught my eye, a hooded figure on the far shore, watching. I quickened our pace, but at the parking lot, the security guard leaned against the booth, eating a sandwich. "You're not going anywhere," he said, chewing slowly. The roads flooded from rain. Rain. The sky was cloudless. That night, our tent felt wrong. The zipper was open, though we'd left it closed. Inside were dried leaves arranged into a crude doll, stones for eyes, a stick smile. Beside it, "Don't you get it?" Lucas sobbed, clutching the bear like a shield. My husband confronted the guard again, but he'd vanished. In his place, a group of teens sat around a fire, laughing loudly. When they saw us, they fell silent, staring as if we were intruders. The next morning, we tried asking other campers for help. But their tents were empty, chairs unfolded, flip-flops abandoned, half-eaten sandwiches on tables. It looked like everyone had fled midnight. Lucas squeezed my hand and whispered, "They left 'cause the lake man told them to." Before I could respond, a splash echoed. We ran to the shore and saw the security guard on the opposite bank, dragging something heavy with a rope. When he turned, I recognized the body of one of the fire teams, glassy eyes, paper-white skin. He spotted us and laughed, a dry, hollow sound, as he pulled the corpse into the lake. We fled back to our tent, but everything was soaked, as if submerged and replaced. The bear sat there, now crudely stitched with red thread into a strange symbol on its chest, the same circle and X from the parking lot. Inside the bear, "You're next." And for the first time, I smelled thick rot and dead fish from the lake, as if the water itself were breathing. Desperate, we grabbed Lucas and ran for the road, but a barbed wire fence, newly erected, blocked the way. The security guard appeared, holding a flashlight that cast an emerald green beam. "Don't you get it?" he repeated, voice inhuman. "The lake needs you." He tossed something at our feet, the knife, now coated in black slime. Lucas screamed and pointed at the lake. Dozens of pale hands emerged, clawing at the air like they grasped something invisible. We bolted into the woods, racing to the main road, where a trucker gave us a ride. As we sped away, I glanced back. The guard stood lakeside, waving with one hand. The other held my son's body, or something like it, greenish skin, blank white eyes. We made it home and tried to forget. But Lucas hasn't spoken since. Yesterday, I found one of his toys in the yard, soaked and reeking of rot. Inside, it never ends. And when I look at the lake near our house, I swear I see the same stone circle on the bottom, a silent invitation. My younger brother, Kyle, was always the type to disappear. Not on purpose, he'd just get distracted by a bird, an unusual rock, or a shadow in the bushes. So when we decided to hike the gorge trail, I knew I had to keep an eye on him. The day started perfectly, weak sun, blue skies, the kind of weather that makes you think nothing could go wrong. But around 3 p.m., the wind shifted. Fast. A dark cloud swallowed the sun, and suddenly we were caught in a mudstorm. Rain fell so hard we could barely see the trail, and the mud slid under our shoes like the entire mountain was melting. We took shelter under an overhanging rock, but Kyle grew restless. "I need to reach the camp before dark," he kept saying, clutching his backpack to his chest. I tried to hold him back, but he bolted, shouting, "I can't wait." Those were the last words I heard him say before a lightning strike knocked me off my feet. When I stood up, he was gone. I ran through the mud, screaming his name, but found only broken branches and footprints that vanished into the sludge. When I reached the camp, soaked and shivering, Kyle was already there. Or so it seemed. He sat in our tent, caked in mud up to his hair, eyes fixed on nothing. "Where were you?" I asked, relieved. He didn't answer. Just kept repeating, "He's gone. Really gone." It took me a while to realize he was talking about himself. The real Kyle had vanished, and this thing in front of me was an empty shell, spouting nonsense and staring at a dead phone. I tried calling for help, but the storm had knocked out the towers. We were trapped with this, Kyle mumbling about voices in the rock and someone laughing underground. The next morning, search teams arrived. They scoured the trail, used dogs, drones, nothing. The fake Kyle only got worse. He circled the camp, stopping abruptly to stare at the gorge like he heard something no one else could. Once, he sprinted to the cliff's edge and screamed, "I'm here. You won't take me." The rangers tried to calm him, but he grabbed one by the uniform, hissing, "He's inside the rock. He wants me to come in." That night, as I slept, I heard a dragging sound from the woods. When I woke, Kyle stood over me, his face unreadable. "He'll call you too," he said, voice not his own. "And you'll answer." The rangers decided to get us off the mountain the next day, but the return trail was a trap. The storm had turned it into a river of mud, and Kyle slowed with every step, like something pulled him backward. Suddenly, he stopped and pointed at a smooth rock wall, the same one the real Kyle had shown me before vanishing. "He's in there," he whispered, eyes wide. "Calling me. Can't you hear?" A ranger tried to grab him, but he broke free and ran toward the cliff, screaming, "I won't pretend anymore." It took 3 men to restrain him, and even then he laughed, a shrill, unhinged sound, while repeating, "You can't hide me from him." That night, in the hotel paid for by the rangers, I noticed something horrifying. Kyle had none of my brother's scars, the cut on his right index finger, the burn mark on his knee. When I asked about it, he stared at me and said, icy calm, he gave me a new body. A better one. I tried calling the police, but his phone was flooded with unsent texts. "All the same, he's here. Get out." The ranger with us gave up, muttering about post-traumatic stress, but I knew better. The last message included a photo of the cliff, a dark smudge on the rock that looked human-shaped. At breakfast, Kyle ate in silence, but his movements were off, stiff, like he was mimicking eating for the first time. When I asked where he'd been when he disappeared, he smiled and said, "I was with him. The one in the rock. He showed me things." His teeth were caked with dirt. I tried to lock myself in the bathroom, but he followed, pressing his face to the door. "You'll see too," he whispered. "He'll take you. Then we'll be a family again." When I came out, he sat on the bed, trembling hands clutching his phone. On the screen, a video recorded in the dark. The cliff face, and something massive shifting in the stone, something that seemed to breathe. The rangers sent us home the next day, but Kyle wouldn't stop talking about the gorge. On the drive back, he rolled down the window and began singing a song I'd never heard, in a language I didn't recognize. When we stopped at a gas station, he vanished for 10 minutes. We found him in the bathroom, huddled in a corner, clutching a chunk of black rock. "He gave this to me," he said, eyes gleaming. "A piece of him." The station's security guard tried to help, but when he saw the rock, he paled. "Throw that away. Now." He didn't ask questions. I tossed the black rock into the station's dumpster, but Kyle followed me, whining like a wounded animal. "You don't understand. He'll be angry." On the road, he stared silently out the window. When we got home, Mom rushed to hug him but froze. "What happened to your hair?" Kyle smiled, revealing dark gums. "Nothing, Mom. Just grew." But it wasn't just longer. It was thicker, like seaweed strands. And his ears, pointed, almost. I didn't want to know. That night, while he slept, I checked his phone. Hundreds of photos of the cliff, all taken from impossible angles, as if someone had been scaling the rock. In one, a long shadow stretched from the wall, a tall, hunched figure cradling what looked like a child. The worst was a video, the real Kyle, recorded inside a crack in the rock, screaming at the camera, "He's lying. Get out." The video cut abruptly to Kyle now, grinning at the screen, his mouth full of teeth that weren't his. I deleted the phone immediately, but it was too late. Kyle stood in the doorway, holding the black rock I'd thrown away. "You saw, didn't you?" he said, voice echoing like it came from a tunnel. "He has the real Kyle. Now he's coming for you." I tried to run, but he was faster. He grabbed my arm with unnatural strength, and when I looked at his hand, the skin was peeling, revealing something dark and slimy underneath. "No use running," he whispered, eyes now completely white. "He's in you too. Since the gorge." 3 months later, I still wake up feeling something under my bed, breathing in sync with me. Kyle vanished a week after we got home, leaving only his phone full of static-filled videos of the quarry and a trail of mud leading to the river near our house. The police say he probably drowned, but I know the truth. Yesterday, I found a new message on my phone, from an unknown number, "He's happy. Now we're 3. And when I look in the mirror, sometimes I see a shadow behind me, the shape of someone familiar, but with too many teeth and hands ending in claws. And the worst part? When that happens, I feel a strange hunger. Like I need to find more people to bring to the gorge.